Good evening. Tonight we take you to Jerusalem, where Israel's far-right Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has made one of the most provocative statements of the war so far. In a press conference held on August 28, 2025, he declared that if Hamas refuses to surrender, Israel should begin annexing parts of the Gaza Strip, territory that has been at the center of conflict, destruction, and bitter politics for nearly 2 years. His words represent not only a policy proposal, but a dramatic shift in Israel's strategic doctrine. Smotrich, known for his uncompromising ideology and fiery rhetoric, walked to the podium with confidence. Reporters and cameras were already waiting, anticipating controversy, and he delivered. He outlined what he called a plan for complete victory in the Gaza Strip by the end of the current year. The message was stark. Hamas must surrender, release hostages, and lay down its weapons, or Gaza will be carved up piece by piece and absorbed into Israel. His speech was punctuated with blunt declarations. He argued that annexation would serve as the ultimate pressure point on Hamas. Each week that the militants refused to yield, he said, Israel would annex more land from the enclave. It was an incremental approach to annexation, territorial expansion tied directly to Hamas's continued resistance. For Smotrich, this was not simply war policy, it was leverage. He then turned to the humanitarian situation, but not with compassion. Instead, he argued that Israel was justified in cutting off Gaza's utilities, its water, its electricity, even its food supplies. According to Smotrich, civilians had already been moved south of a designated corridor. What remained in northern and central Gaza, he claimed, were Hamas fighters and only Hamas fighters. They will either surrender, he said, or die of hunger and thirst. These words stunned observers, raising immediate concerns about violations of international law. Collective punishment, deliberately depriving civilians of basic necessities, is widely considered illegal under the Geneva Conventions. But Smotrich dismissed such arguments. He insisted his policy was legitimate, lawful, and entirely justified. Then came his definition of victory. Victory, he said, means Hamas is militarily defeated and economically suffocated, unable to function anymore. In his view, the endgame was clear. Not a ceasefire, not negotiations, but Hamas's total collapse. He told reporters this could be achieved within 3 to 4 months, suggesting a timeline that points directly to the end of this calendar year. Finally, he issued a challenge to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He called on Netanyahu to adopt this plan immediately, instruct the Israeli Defense Forces to carry out the operational components, and make the political decisions that would cement annexation. Bring the people of Israel a complete victory in the Gaza Strip by the end of the year, he declared. With that, Smotrich left the stage, sparking a firestorm of debate across Israel and beyond. This press conference, though brief, carries enormous implications. For decades, Israel has resisted officially annexing Gaza. Even after withdrawing settlers in 2005 and maintaining a strict blockade, the territory was never formally absorbed. Gaza remained an occupied land, contested and volatile. Smotrich's call to annex it changes that narrative. It would mark the most significant territorial expansion since the annexation of East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, moves that remain disputed internationally to this day. Human rights organizations and international observers warn that this would not only inflame the conflict, but fundamentally alter the legal and political landscape. Annexation by force violates the United Nations Charter. It could trigger war crime charges at the International Criminal Court, deepen Israel's isolation abroad, and fuel unrest across the Arab world. For Palestinians, Smotrich's remarks confirm long-held fears that the war is less about Hamas alone and more about erasing Palestinian claims to land. Domestically, his speech lays bare the divisions within Israel's war cabinet. On one side are voices urging negotiations, particularly for the release of hostages still held in Gaza. On the other are hardliners like Smotrich, who see negotiations as weakness and insist on maximalist goals. This split mirrors the wider Israeli public, torn between grief for lost lives, outrage at Hamas's attacks, and exhaustion from a war that has dragged on for nearly 2 years without resolution. The humanitarian situation in Gaza continues to deteriorate. With infrastructure shattered, tens of thousands dead, and hundreds of thousands displaced, aid groups warn of famine and epidemic. Yet Smotrich explicitly argues that further deprivation is not only a tactic, but a necessity. His words suggest that suffering itself has become part of the strategy. International reaction has been swift, Though measured, diplomats in Europe expressed alarm privately, fearing this policy would erase any hope of a future two-state solution. In Washington, officials walk a delicate line. The United States remains Israel's closest ally, but American leaders face growing domestic and international pressure to push back against annexationist policies. Arab governments, already angered by the war's devastation, view Smotrich's remarks as confirmation that Israel intends to hold Gaza permanently. The proposal also highlights how ideology has begun to eclipse pragmatism. Smotrich is not simply advocating military victory, he is advocating transformation of Gaza's political geography. By tying hostage return and Hamas's surrender directly to annexation, he reframes the conflict as a zero-sum contest where land itself becomes a bargaining chip. Critics say this risks endless escalation with no off-ramp for peace. Analysts note that Smotrich's comments may serve as both policy and political theatre. With elections looming and Netanyahu under increasing domestic pressure, Smotrich positions himself as the uncompromising voice of the right, offering bold solutions while challenging the government to act decisively. His gamble is that war-weary Israelis will rally around a plan promising clarity and finality, even if it risks further bloodshed. But history offers cautionary lessons. Annexation has never brought stability to contested territories. In the West Bank, Israeli settlement expansion has only deepened tensions. In East Jerusalem, annexation has fueled cycles of protest and violence. And in the Golan Heights, decades after annexation, international recognition remains absent. Applying this strategy to Gaza, with its dense population and entrenched resistance, could plunge the region into even greater chaos. As the war grinds on, the fate of hostages remains a painful shadow. Families of the abducted urge negotiation and compromise, yet Smotrich offers only ultimatums: surrender or starvation. His approach leaves little room for dialogue and none for reconciliation. For the people of Gaza, battered by bombardment and siege, his plan offers no horizon of relief, only deeper suffering. Tonight, Smotrich's words reverberate across the region. To his supporters, he is a visionary, promising to end the war with decisive action. To his critics, he is a dangerous ideologue, pushing Israel toward international isolation and moral peril. The truth, perhaps, lies in the consequences yet to come. And so, nearly 2 years into a war that has devastated both Israel and Gaza, the path forward grows even more uncertain. Will the Israeli government embrace annexation as official policy? Will international pressure force a different course? Or will this speech mark the beginning of a new, more dangerous chapter in a conflict with no end in sight? One thing is clear. For civilians trapped in this struggle on both sides of the divide, the costs are already unbearable. And if annexation becomes reality, those costs will only rise.
שר האוצר בצלאל סמוטריץ'.
רגע, לשבת.
And now we are actually starting to charge Hamas the price for its mistake, or rather for entrenching itself in its mistake as the war continues and Hamas does not surrender and does not return the hostages. Speaking of this, in my opinion, this is the greatest lever of pressure on Hamas to surrender and return all the hostages. Every week that passes, when Hamas drags us into war and does not surrender, we are shutting off water, shutting off electricity, shutting off everything at this stage after we have moved everyone, the civilian population, south of the Morag corridor. There are only Hamas terrorists in the rest of the Gaza Strip who, as I said, will either surrender or die of hunger and thirst. This is completely legal, completely legitimate. We are talking about Hamas terrorists and only. What does victory look like? And I repeat that it can be achieved within 3 to 4 months. Hamas is militarily defeated and economically suffocated and unable to function anymore. I call on the Prime Minister to adopt this plan in full immediately, to instruct the IDF to carry out the elements that depend on it, to make the political decisions that depend on us and on the Prime Minister, and to bring the people of Israel a complete victory in the Gaza Strip by the end of the current calendar year.